released Superman trailer just like yesterday. And so I thought, you know what? Martin Willis is a bit of a Superman himself. That guy is all over the place, and he is quite an impressive character.
It's called Crazy, but yeah.
Crazy
but thank
dude.
You. That's very nice of you.
Yeah.
I'll take that middle name this time.
Little compliment there for you.
Yeah.
So I just want to tell people out there that something I'm really excited about, that we have what's called the UFO update out, or UFO report, the Open Minds UFO report. So some people have been confused because it has been a bit of an abrupt change. And we've been planning this change for a while. It was going to go a little more smooth, but it was brought on a little sooner than we had anticipated because, as many of you know, Jason and Maureen are no longer with Open Minds. They've gone on to do other things. And so I am left all by myself. But actually, you know, we have people like Martin and others that we work with and will continue to do so. But yes, this show does replace Spacing Out, for those of you asking. So Spacing Out will no longer exist, and now you have your Open Mind UFO report, where it's a bit more newsy. We try to keep it more direct, where we get straight to the news and get that news out to you guys quickly and succinctly so you can know what's going on. The other people who update you about news, of course, is every week on the podcast here. Martin and I talk about it. But before that, I do want to talk about our guest. His name is Stan Schatt, and he is an author. A really interesting guy. He's written a couple books, most recently a book called Alien Love, which is actually... It's a novel, so it's a science fiction, and it's kind of his ideas around what might be happening right now and how first contact may happen. And essentially it's, you know, of course there's a love theme in there, this guy falling in love with this woman who turns out to be an alien. I think many of us feel like that at times, that is this woman really an alien? I felt like that sometimes. So, but he's also written a book that is nonfiction called Extraterrestrial First Contact, Past, Present, and Future, where he's delved more into UFOs and extraterrestrials in a nonfiction manner, and it's kind of this research that then turned into the nonfiction book. So we talked to him about all of this and his thoughts about, the possibilities. Are aliens walking among us? Is Martin Willis an alien himself?
Well, actually, my girlfriend has actually claimed that she herself is an alien, and she wants to go home.
But that's to Russia, right?
No, she's actually...
off planet.
I think she thinks that she is. Now,
I thought you were making like a resident alien joke.
No, she kind of, I can't tell if she's joking about it, but I'm pretty sure she is.
Yeah, well, some of us, when we look at the world today, can kind of feel that way. I think a lot of people feel that way. Am I really human? These people act kind of crazy. If there is a planet with people more like me, I want to go back to it. Speaking of...
I told her she could take a DNA test, and find out for sure.
That would be great.
If it comes up Neanderthal, then she knows she's probably out of luck.
That would be really good. But why don't we get straight into the news? And as usual, we'll let you start off. What is the UFO news of the week that you would like to talk about, my friend?
Well, it has to do with golfing, or a golf course.
Oh.
Yeah, back on May 29th, about 11th, just about noontime in Florida, West Palm Beach, at a golf course, a woman sighted a cigar-shaped UFO that just hovered in place. And when she first looked up at it, she thought it might have been a kite or some type of balloon or something like that. But as she studied it, she started seeing like portholes on it. And then, interesting enough, she says the thing that you always hear over and over again: how can a large object like this be sitting over the golf course, hovering there and making no noise at all? Mm-hmm. And then her dog got upset about it, started curling his tail under. She did not have her camera on her, but she got home, and as soon as she got home, she drew a sketch of it, before she reported it. And I don't know. Did you get a chance to look at this, Alejandro?
The Florida West Palm Beach one you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's funny is it's kind of not a drawing. It's like a art piece.
It really is.
Because it looks like she did multicolored charcoal pencil or something like that.
Yeah, it sort of looks like an Art Deco version of the Star Trek's USS Enterprise a little bit. The boxy.
But it is interesting, and actually, even though it's a bit of an odd shape because it's kind of cigar shaped, but it has a dome to one end, and it's got these portholes along the side. It's not something I would have to go look it up, but I think I've seen very similar drawings, in fact, on several different occasions throughout the years.
So about a year and a half ago, I lived on a golf course in a condo, and I was doing my show one Wednesday night. This is what I find kind of an interesting connection. Well, later on after the show, it was pretty late, and I had a knock on the door, and I answered it, and it was the next door neighbor. And she said, "I was knocking, trying to get a hold of you." And she said, I was walking down toward the golf course, and I saw this big triangle like fly right over the golf course, no sound or anything. And she goes, "I was trying to get you out." She goes, "By the time I came back around after trying to get you, it was gone." So I go, "Oh my goodness." I said, I was doing a show, ironically, right then and there about UFOs. And she looks at me kind of strange. She goes, "Well, I don't know what this was." And I said, "Would you be willing to go on my show next week and talk about it?" She said, "I don't believe in UFOs." So I said, "Well, what do you think that was?" She goes, "I have no idea, but I don't believe in UFOs, and you can't use my name."
Wow.
So that was the end of the story.
That's
that happened
funny.
Right when I was doing my show.
Mm-hmm. How funny. I mean, she really, and that's so weird. It's like, people do get like that. And, you hear those stories and you even see the reports. I saw something strange. It did weird things. I don't know what it is. It's not a UFO. I'm not saying it's UFO because I don't believe in UFOs.
Right.
Well, you just saw something that you can't identify. I'm sorry, friend, but you saw a UFO. You UFO weirdo.
Get over it, yeah.
Yeah, you're a UFO weirdo now. There's nothing you can do about it.
Get the tinfoil.
Yeah, really funny. Yeah, really interesting case. That's one of the Roger Marsh cases from the MUFON files.
And, I thought it was something that the dog was reacting. Mm-hmm. Because they're very sensitive to anything like that.
Crazy dogs.
Yeah.
Are you done?
So, I think I'm done.
Okay. So I'll get to my case.
All right.
My first case is, and I would love to hear your feedback on this. This is a man who contacted us, who saw some things over Lake Tahoe when he was on vacation in April. And they were these little white dots flying around. He took some video, but the video, of course, didn't turn out that great because they're small little balls. He said he saw, 1, 2, but at one point 7 of them together. All he did was point his phone at them because, it was too bright for him to see the LCD to see if he was getting anything. And then when he reviewed it, he saw all of these objects. He says he believes that they were not balloons because they were picking up speed, they were moving in different directions, moving in multiple weird ways. Now, it's difficult to see them, their movement in the videos. Of course, they could be birds or balloons. However, I think what's interesting, and normally I wouldn't think that this case was that interesting all on its own, but we've had, especially in the last few years, a lot of reports of these little white orbs doing strange things. We've had news stories from Utah and from Colorado. I keep in contact with a researcher from Utah with MUFON, Erica Lukes, who has been keeping an eye on these things, and she believes they're all similar. And then what's interesting, and I put this in the story, a couple things. First of all, that in Colorado about a year ago, a news reporter went to go investigate these sightings, and he saw something himself and recorded it. He says it was a little white orb that sat there for a long period of time before shooting off at high speed. He said there's no way that's a balloon. And then, this is really interesting, and I'm a little more privy to this, although we've covered it a little bit, and maybe some people know, you probably know. There are people who claim they can call in UFOs, and in particular, a lot of Californians. And they'll usually have some religious basis behind this. They'll do a meditation. And sure enough, people will say they'll see these little white dots. Often, I'm like, well, they're probably balloons floating over. However, there's a documentary coming out somewhat it's soon. And Jeremy Corbell, who you interviewed recently on your podcast, has created this. It's called The Summoner. You can see the trailer, a link to the trailer on our site. And he says, he went to go do a documentary about these guys who say they can summon UFOs. And some of these little white dots, he says he saw move strangely, and he doesn't think they're all balloons. So it's this little white orb phenomena. And honestly, in full disclosure here, I've seen little white orbs do some really strange things, and this seems to be kind of the most common daylight sighting. So, what do you think there, buddy? What's going on?
Well, it's hard. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to look at that video, but it's hard to try to figure out whether it could be weather patterns, a possibility, like to say, I'm looking at an image of one of these orbs. It does look oblong like a balloon does. Mm-hmm. Whether it is or not, I can't say. And, because sometimes weather patterns can, swirl and do all kinds of, be kind of interesting to see if they stay in a pattern together or if they separate. Mm-hmm. Was that the case in these?
Well, you have to rely on witness testimony once again, but he says that they did, separate, move in different directions, and kind of zip around or sit still for long periods of time. So similar to other reports of strange behavior.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know if you've ever been to Lake Tahoe. It's a beautiful area.
I haven't.
Oh, it's absolutely gorgeous. And but there is something. I lived there for a short time, and there seems like it's kind of a mysterious area in general. Mm-hmm. You just kind of get that feeling. I never saw any. I never had a sighting there or anything like that. But it's very high altitude, and it just But California does kind of attract a lot of people that may think they can attract UFOs too. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. There's some weird people. It's like a giant UFO conference in California. Some really cool, intelligent people, but there are some very unique people out there. Yeah. I love California, though. I'm like, these days, for some reason, I'm a Californian at heart. I mean, I love getting out there as much as I can. But
it's a sweet area. I was there 9 years, and
wow,
and really enjoyed my time there.
So the next story I want to talk about is you might see on the news all over the place now this map, this UFO map. And it's so interesting how much attention these maps get, especially ones that are very well done, such as this one. This is a data scientist, and, my story was, I think, the second story to get out there on the map. And it was my own fault because this guy, Max Gelka, had sent me information. Hey, look at this cool map I made. I was studying. I'm a data scientist, and I was looking at UFO sightings, especially mass sightings across the country, using NUFORC information, the National UFO Reporting Center. And he put together this interactive map that is really cool, showing sightings throughout the country for the last 100 years practically, actually since 1905, so but more than 100 years. But that he also highlighted the mass UFO sightings, and if you click on the map you can find out more about how many people saw those sightings, where they were, information mostly that he got from MUFON. So he wanted to point that out. Now, there aren't as many sightings as you would think in some of these mass sightings because it's NUFORC information. NUFORC is a great organization, but it's a one-man show. He's and you got to know he's out there in your neck of the woods. But MUFON collects more information, but the unfortunate thing is that although the database for MUFON, you could go search individual sightings and sightings in particular areas, it's hard to extract the data to do large overall views of the data like Max was doing here. And Newfork, it was easier to do that. That's why you see a lot of maps based off of Newfork information. But what he put together were the top 10 mass sightings and how many reports came with those sightings. They include Tinley Park lights in Illinois, and that got first place, third place, and sixth place. So
wow.
Really interesting. The state director in Illinois, Sam Moranto, actually has investigated these sightings along with the Chicago O'Hare sightings, which was an important one. But really interesting. A lot of people don't know that there's this hot spot in Illinois out there, and we're actually going to have him come, and I haven't even heard back from him, so hopefully he'll accept our invitation to come speak at the conference, the UFO Congress, this next time about this. But there were a couple more mass sightings from Illinois. There was Rockford Lights in January of 2001 with 25 reports. So really interesting. Other sightings such as the Phoenix Lights are up there. They're fourth on the list with 65 reports. A lot of people have commented, I thought there were thousands of people who saw that. It's true, but only 65 people reported it to Newfork. I'm not even sure how many reports that MUFON got, but there were some local, like a local city councilwoman who herself got like 1,000 reports, and she called every single one of those people back and tried to champion their sightings and get some answers. He also then decided to look at the UFO sightings per state per capita. So how many people, how many sightings per person, and he mapped that out, and that's a really interesting map. The darker areas are the states with more sightings per person. And this is also interactive on his site. I just have a screenshot, but I have a link back to his site where you can play with the interactive maps. And, out west is where, and not California, but out in the northwest and in the southwest, or, and in the northeast, per capita, he found more sightings, which is really interesting. So a lot of great material, and the good thing now is that the media is really picking up on it, and I'm seeing tons of stories popping up about this map, and people saying, how does our state rank? Or even national media like the Washington Post has picked it up just to talk about the map. Pretty cool stuff.
It is, wow. And per capita, I think, makes a lot of sense when it comes to something like this. Mm-hmm. My old buddy Sam Moranto, nice guy. I'm glad to hear that you're asking him to come out.
I love Sam. Sam's a cool
guy. I'll
nudge
him for you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I know him. I've known him for years. He's a really cool guy. I'm surprised we haven't had him before because he's a really neat guy. So, very cool. And then just really quickly, a couple other stories that are really neat out there. The Montreal mayor, he is a male mayor, but Coder, I believe is how you say it. I'm probably saying that wrong, but Montreal is a French part of Canada. And I guess this guy is really well loved. People love this guy. And just recently a video was posted of him as a teenager talking about a UFO sighting he has. So you could see he's a very well put together guy. He's speaking French in the video, but there is a translation of what he saw. But essentially he said, he saw this thing flying around strangely, and he knew it was not of this world. So it's a really neat video of this mayor in Montreal. And then finally, this is probably of interest to you single people out there. George Norrie has created a paranormal dating site. Now, what's funny about this is it wasn't too long ago that the amazing Kreskin came up with his supernatural dating site. And I guess now he has some competition with George Norrie and his paranormal dating site.
I heard there's like 200,000 people signed up on it within
You're kidding.
Just a couple of days or something.
Wow. Well, I think George Norrie is single himself, so there are probably a lot of potential suitors going on there hoping to talk to George there.
Maybe that's why he championed it.
Yeah, that could be.
I got some email. Someone asked if Podcast UFO was going to start an escort service. And I didn't
Oh,
understand what they were talking about
uh-huh.
until I heard the dating thing
Yeah.
going on. Yeah.
Well, that would be a way for you to make some extra money and go meet some interesting people.
Yeah.
And, you could have some women buying you some expensive dinners.
Yeah, it's in the works, by the way.
Oh, it
So,
is great.
yeah.
You heard it
Yep.
here first, or did you talk about it on your
I
podcast?
haven't talked about it.
Oh,
No.
great. So
Yeah.
we were able to announce the Martin Willis podcast UFO escort service.
This is how rumors start, buddy.
I can't wait to see the picture of the ad for the service with you in a suit with an ascot, looking very sophisticated.
Oh, yes. And a monocle. Yeah.
Oh, it's very
Yeah.
fancy, very fancy. Well, that's all I have to share for the news right now. Of course, we've got a lot more stories about recent UFO sightings. Roger Marsh, I got to thank. He posts a lot of stories, and he's kind of stepped up, and he's writing a few more stories, not just about MUFON sightings, but other stuff. And I think Roger's great, so very happy about that.
Yeah.
So go to openminds.tv to see more of that. And I guess, do you have any more stories or news you wanted to talk about, my friend?
I think I'm done this time.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to hear Martin at Podcast UFO. And I guess let's get, without further ado, to our interview with Mr. Schatt. I am very happy to welcome Stan Schatt. He is a futurist and author of fiction and nonfiction. Hello and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. I'm very happy to be here.
So it looks like you're working on a lot of exciting things, although you do have a nonfiction book that you've written about extraterrestrial contact. Your most recent book is a fiction book, correct?
Yeah, they work hand in hand, obviously. I've been fascinated with the idea of first contact for a long time. So the nonfiction book I did is on first contact, and that kind of led me to speculate and then write a novel about it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll get into that. And I guess I want to start off with that. You write about some of the current possible extraterrestrial contacts, past contacts, and then also the ramifications of like open or acknowledged contact. In your mind, do you believe people have been contacted by extraterrestrials?
I do. I don't have a smoking gun, which I would love to have, but yeah, I think if you look at all if you take away the 99% that are explained, that still leaves quite a few that are unexplained.
Mm-hmm. Do you the contact that you're referring to, is it sort of a contact in that they are visiting and flying around, or do you believe there has been communication?
There have been a number of unexplained phenomena. The one that fascinates me, which at one time I thought was ridiculous, but the more I looked into it, the more it seemed a little plausible, were all the reports that have filtered in over the years, including some from astronauts that claim that there's activity on the moon that's been kind of hidden from the population.
Mm-hmm. And so, so that's more along the lines of that. Then do you subscribe to the idea that UFOs, for instance, could be people from other planets coming and visiting or observing us?
Well, one of the issues that scientists always have, or even science fiction writers when they write, is having to deal with the immense distances in space in terms of getting from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm inclined to believe that one of two things is possible. Either it is possible to go from point A to point B through, a kind of wormhole to get around the limitations of the speed of light, or B, we're really talking about interdimensional type travel.
Mm-hmm.
The conventional idea that people are traveling for hundreds of years to get from point A to point B doesn't appear to be that realistic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find what's interesting too is that typically when you talk to theoretical physicists, they don't have such a problem with the idea that it's possible, but it's astronomers especially who find it difficult to believe that it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand about the latest research in physics, the bending of space seems to make a lot of sense to them in terms of the possibility from moving from point A to point B, kind of like folding a piece of paper to get from one part to the next part.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess going back in your past, you've written a lot of books, and they're not all about extraterrestrials.
No.
You have a lot of topics that you tackle. But when was it that you became interested in this topic, and why?
That's a good question. I started reading science fiction when I was in grade school, and continued on in high school and college. I even taught during the time that I was a professor. I actually taught classes in science fiction. And I had a science background. I have an undergraduate degree in chemistry.
Mm-hmm. And
so
what did you teach? What were the subjects you taught?
Well, that's an interesting question too, because over the years, it's varied. I mean, I started off traditionally teaching literature classes. And I did that at the University of Southern California, University of Houston. I even did it as a Fulbright in Japan. But in addition to that, over the years, I gained expertise in other areas and wound up being a professor of telecommunications and data communications. At one time taught at DeVry Institute of Technology. So I kind of moved from teaching literature to teaching applied science classes.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so somewhere along the way, sorry, I interrupted you when you were going to get into it, you got into this topic.
Yeah. So over the years, I even wrote college textbooks on data communications and telecommunications. And as a futurist, I projected things out several years and thought about some of these topics. And over the last 5 years, I've had more time to devote to writing. And so I returned to my first love and started looking at some of these questions more closely, like extraterrestrial life. And I realized a number of scientists have written books, but there really hasn't been too much written for the layman when it comes to the subject of the issues behind extraterrestrial first contact. We talk about historically civilizations that here on Earth have been buried, but we always had a Rosetta Stone in order to kind of translate most of these languages that disappeared. And obviously, that would not be the case with the first contact with a truly alien civilization. Mm-hmm. So that question kind of intrigued me, and so I started doing research. For many years, that's what I did for a living was research as a futurist. So that's what I wound up doing, and I read quite a bit from some of the people who are with SETI and some other scientists, and it became more and more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. With first contact and fiction, one of the things I find interesting is that it's almost universal, not always, but almost always when science fiction writers write about the future and the distant future, aliens are included. Almost like maybe subconsciously or somehow it's a foregone conclusion that one day we're going to meet some alien neighbors out there and have some sort of communication. I know a lot of times they use it as kind of a literary tool to represent different things, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's inevitable, and why do you think the public kind of feels that way?
Well, I think it's a very basic part of human nature. I wrote an essay, about 30 years ago, when I was in Japan, part of a book I wrote when I was in Japan. But the essay is called "Cosmic Loneliness," and basically the premise is that historically we have yearned, to we've looked out at space, at the vastness of space, and we've asked ourselves, are we alone? And there's a part of us that does not want to be alone, doesn't want to think that in this entire universe we are the only intelligent, sentient beings. And so there is a desire to find others, perhaps to help us find out what the meaning of life is,
Mm-hmm. And it seems unlikely that there wouldn't be someone else out there. The difficult thing is whether or not we would be able to find them, and in the instance that they are visiting us, whether or not they want to talk to us, because if they are visiting us, it doesn't seem like they want to really communicate, at least so far.
Yeah. It's interesting because sometimes I think we overinflate our importance in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
We're one very small planet next to one very small star in kind of a corner of the universe. We're not at the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting if you look at typical science fiction movies that deal with aliens. So often they come here and they want our natural resources and they want our women for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not it's not realistic. I mean, the point is that there probably are very narrow windows for communication between species, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
If they are too far advanced for us, it would be like us trying to communicate with ants. We'd really wonder whether it was worthwhile doing. And there's even this theory that when a race gets advanced enough, it goes to some kind of transcendence. When it goes beyond the physical, becomes more of a kind of a spiritual entity after a while, or it downloads itself into computers, that sort of thing. So there's kind of a narrow window of opportunity. And so if you think about it, there's the Drake equation, which historically, scientists have referred to as a way of predicting the odds of encountering, another species out there. But there are probably factors that need to be added to the Drake equation, such as the fact that the two species are within a certain similar part of their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's some reason for them to communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense, especially in that if there is another civilization that is somewhere around a similar area of development as we are, then maybe we would be more compatible to be able to communicate. But at the same time, then neither of us have the technology to get to one another. Whereas, let's say that other civilization is more advanced and does have that technology, by that time they may see us as ants and not be interested in the communication.
Right. So that raises some issues. So one is how many civilizations are there out there that are in a similar stage of development? Mm-hmm. And number two is, if they decide to communicate via signal the way, we assume, if you look at contact, You know, that was the idea that aliens would broadcast messages to us. If you look at that, it raises all kinds of issues. How do you make sense out of a message when you have no frame of reference? Mm-hmm. It may very well be that mathematics is not completely universal. We make up all kinds of rules about the universe based on the physics that we have now. And if you go back 500 years, a lot of our assumptions would have been wrong.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of I was just going to say, and there's a lot of fundamental things such as gravity that we don't understand still.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We don't understand that, and also just if you think about it, we sent Voyager out there with a plaque that showed a naked man and a woman with the man's hand reaching out. Mm-hmm. And we assumed that symbolically was universal. And since then, a lot of scientists have started to realize how ridiculous that was. First of all, if an alien had several limbs, sticking one limb out doesn't necessarily mean a sign of peace. Mm. I mean, our right hand reaching out goes back to the Middle Ages when you wanted to show somebody that you didn't have your sword in your hand. And so if you reached a hand out without your sword, that meant you were reaching out in friendship. Well, it doesn't necessarily translate. Similarly, not wearing clothes doesn't necessarily translate. What is that saying about us? So a lot of the things that we take for granted in terms of our symbology may not mean the same thing to an alien species. Mm-hmm. They may not even be able to perceive reality within the same spectrum of light that we do.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, when you looked into all of this and you started researching, you probably ran across the idea of the abduction phenomena. What are your thoughts regarding that?
It's interesting. The question would come up, are there graves out there that are doing research? There have been so many stories about Dulce mm-hmm. and about supposedly government treaties with aliens that it makes you think that there's some possibility that a little of that exists. The rumor that's been around forever has been that we made some kind of deal with the devil, that the aliens could do a certain amount of research on our people in exchange for technology that we presumably received. So it's hard to reconcile, abduction with and the things that supposedly go on with that, with the importance of having things like Velcro and silicon chips, which supposedly are some of the
right. Although
the treasures.
The rumors of these government agreements are certainly much less popular, or there's much less of that than there are the people who claim to have these experiences. And it just makes me think, because along the scenario of if we're not as significant as we think we are, then it could be that, the rumors that I've seen so far are pretty unfounded as far as some sort of agreement. I've never seen much in the way that supports that, but there's so many claims of people having these experiences that I guess it would be possible that they would treat us like we treat animals, where they kind of capture us and check us out.
Yeah, well, it's certainly possible. Although what I would wonder is why we don't see the, let's say when there's I even, one time I had a college job as an autopsy assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I wonder is, with the number of people who are dead, who are autopsied, why wouldn't we wind up with some of the supposed tracking devices?
Mm-hmm.
So why aren't more of those being revealed? But I kind of wonder about that.
That's a good point. I understand. Yeah, why then in autopsies are they not finding these possible, alien implants? That's a good question. That also makes me think, though, that, and your thoughts on this, you may be familiar with the Harvard professor John Mack, who is a psychologist and looked into this topic. He thought that perhaps there was a third party involved with these abduction experiences, however, that these were not physical experiences in nature. And that also brings up, the idea of if they communicate, you talked about what if our ways of communication are not even compatible. What if it is they can, their communication is telepathic? That would also complicate a first contact.
Yeah, you wonder how sophisticated communication could be telepathically if you're dealing with minds that are so different.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder about that because I've studied different languages over the years, and I know that here on Earth, of course, we all are. We're a lot, we have the same DNA and all the rest of it, but so many cultures are limited by language.
Mm-hmm.
They can't express certain concepts because they just don't have the language to do it. And it affects everything. I mean, the Hopi Indians, for example, from what I understand, live in the present. They don't really have language to express the past or the future. So if you have a frame of reference that is so different, how can you really communicate telepathically effectively?
Mm-hmm.
It would be like us communicating with dolphins. Their view of reality is so different in the water, with their sonar.
Mm-hmm.
How would you communicate telepathically? So it's a very convenient shorthand that science fiction writers use. Because it's a way to overcome all the difficulties
mm-hmm.
of communication quickly.
Right.
But
mm-hmm.
I wonder about the practicality of it in terms of real life.
Mm-hmm. Also, what's interesting, you bring up, how other cultures, because of their language, are limited. If it's true there is telepathic communication, then that would highlight where our mode of communication may be very limited. We just don't realize it because we don't realize there could be other possibilities out there.
Right, and it could very well be if some creature did communicate with us telepathically. Maybe the way it would work would be in terms of dreams,
Mm-hmm.
When we're in our unconscious anyway,
Mm-hmm.
Where we have images. Maybe that's a way that communication could take place. It would be difficult to imagine in conscious terms unless it was like a daydream, where you just kind
Mm-hmm.
of have this hallucination.
Yeah, interesting. And of course, there are some people, you may or may not know this, there are some people who believe that is the case, that people are being influenced or in some cases inspired by extraterrestrials in their dreams.
Yeah, well, it's certainly possible. It's fascinating if you look at human history and you see certain breakthroughs. And,
Mm-hmm.
well, for example, DNA, double helix, and the dream, that one of the discoverers had, where he actually saw the molecule in his head, the shape of the molecule.
Yeah.
So a lot of times our unconscious works, and then we see things in our dreams, and it turns out to be a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. So, First Contact, your book is about First Contact, a couple of them, a fiction and a nonfiction. So you must have kind of contemplated or thought about different scenarios. What are some of the different scenarios that you thought of?
Okay. Well, of course, one major issue is communication.
Mm-hmm.
And SETI has been working on that. They've had some of the best minds for years trying to figure out how we could establish ground rules to actually communicate. So part of First Contact has to do with communication. Another part has to do with the danger to the less technological society. On Earth, our First Contact history has been very damaging to the side that had the less developed technology.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about the Incas and the Aztecs, or you're talking about other civilizations, when they encounter a civilization that has weaponry that's superior, they've suffered, whether it's from the superior weapons or whether it's from disease. So that's one of the things I look at in the book, has to do with how you minimize some of those dangers. Another one has to do with the impact on society. So take this scenario, for example. What if the first visitors, alien visitors, turned out to be missionaries?
Mm-hmm.
Because on Earth, so often that has been the case, in terms of first contacts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, how does that impact traditional religion? How will the evangelical Christians react to the idea that rather than God being in the image, or God's creation being in His own image, what if we have aliens who look very different, who also claim that God is, behind them?
Mm-hmm.
It raises some fascinating questions.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Brookings report done, I guess, 50 years ago, supposedly for our government, that looked at what would be the impact of alien visitation. And, in those days, they were predicting riots in the streets. Think of the impact on our economies, for example. Well, what happens if aliens come with technology that renders petroleum obsolete? What happens to some of our major what happens to Wall Street? What happens to the stock market? So I look at a number of those issues. It's easy to see how an alien visitor that brings superior technology would disrupt the world's economy. It also would disrupt the world's governments, particularly if we find out that governments have been lying to us over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see a loss of faith in many of the world's governments.
Mm-hmm. In your book, and what is the name of your latest book, the fiction one?
Oh, it's called Alien Love.
Okay. And just so people know, the nonfiction, which is also fairly recent, right? Published in February.
Yeah, that's called Extraterrestrial First Contact.
Mm-hmm.
Past, present, and future.
Mm-hmm. What is the scenario in Alien Love? How does First Contact happen?
Ironically, we have an ex-Navy SEAL who happens to discover that there are many alien races that have agents here on Earth, and they have their own agendas. So he happens to fall in love with a female and learns later that she's not really human. So, but he in the book he encounters other aliens who are very different, who don't look human, and they happen to be working at Dulce with our government. There's no reason why there couldn't be several different alien races. And in fact, on Earth. In fact, my premise for the book is that Earth today could very much be like what's the novel or the famous movie Casablanca? That Earth today could be very much like Casablanca just before the outbreak of World War II, when there were all kinds of agents, enemy agents wandering around, each with their own agenda. Right? And Casablanca was kind of like a neutral site, and so this is where they conducted their intelligence and their espionage and everything else. So the tagline for Alien Love essentially is Casablanca meets Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of it's silly for us to think that we are smart enough to really understand, if there are aliens, what their real motivation is. I mean, as I say in the book, why should we assume that they're telling us the truth? When we encounter primitive peoples and we want something from them, we're not historically, we've not been completely honest with them. So we have this kind of premise that any civilization that is technologically advanced enough to come out and meet us has to be good. And by the way, there's a big war going on inside SETI Lab right now between two groups. And one group, which has some pretty impressive names behind it, besides David Brin, you've got Tesla's Elon Musk, and you've got what's his name? The Theory of Everything.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, Stephen Hawking, and several others who basically say, hey, if you're going to sit there and shout in the forest, you have to pretty much know what's out there. If you just shout in the forest, you never know who's going to come and see who you are. And so they're urging, to listen but not send.
Which I know Schatt often makes that argument for people to realize that they are just listening. SETI.
Well,
they're
Shostak's being disingenuous because he's written books in which he has argued the contrary. He's argued in favor of sending messages.
Yeah, he seems to be kind of a fence sitter in this argument, maybe teetering each way periodically. But I think we get this idea of the benevolent, advanced extraterrestrial from Carl Sagan, who was in that camp. Along with some others, Michio Kaku's over there, some others who, like you had said, believe they're so advanced they probably will be more well-intentioned, but we don't know.
Well, I mean, think of this. The old adage that the trains always ran on time in Italy under Mussolini. in Germany under Hitler. The idea is that a totalitarian government, in some ways, far more efficient than democracy. Right? It's easy to channel resources in a totalitarian government. You basically decide what you want to do, and you order people to do it, and they do it. Right?
It's a whole thing that a lot of people argue a benevolent monarch is the best form of government, or
right, exactly. And so, I'm not sure that I think Star Trek was wishful thinking. This idea that we have this federation of peace-loving planets, and they all agree that they're not going to interfere with the development of other civilizations. Let them be and protect them and all this sort of thing. And the question is, why? I mean, first of all, it takes enormous financial resources to travel in space. I mean, these starships that you see in Star Trek, they don't come cheap. So why are you exploring? It's true, that there is an innate trait within humans to want to explore and to expand, but it comes at an economic price. So, for example, during the age of exploration, when Christopher Columbus and all these explorers were out there, they were expected to come back with something to justify the expense. Right? I mean, it wasn't just pure exploration. They were supposed to come back with spices and gold and everything else.
Right.
So that's why, when I started to think about it, I thought, well, what would motivate a civilization to go and reach out to another one? Well, it could be religious zeal. It could be that they need resources, that they need to trade. And it could be that they're simply an expansionist society.
So,
and the fact there may be lots of civilizations out there, but a lot of them may have gone silent simply because there are some out there that they are aware of. They just don't want to let them know where they are.
So when you, so for instance, when you came up with this scenario for your book, was it a literary vehicle, or was it a real possibility? Do you believe that it might be possible that there are these agents or other that are here preparing for something, or was it a way to kind of highlight some of all of the different possible motivations?
Yeah, I think it is both. I mean, what I try to do in the book is I took a lot of rumors that have circulated over the years on the web and in other places. The idea of, of a mining colony on the moon, for example, an alien colony, statements by astronauts about seeing UFOs, but also about seeing activity on the moon and being told not to say anything about it. All the rumors about, Magic 12 and about, supposedly government work with aliens, all these things together. And I try to envision a scenario where somebody who doesn't believe in any of this stuff is exposed to it and just see how he reacts to it. But he had to have the physical means to survive, so I made him an ex-SEAL, so at least he's got some physical resources to help him survive some of this.
And so
when you write it, exactly. But when you write a story like this, I mean, it's got elements in it that are plausible and possible, and the idea is to just get people to think about it. One thing science fiction is useful for is because you can speculate about almost anything, and people will read it because it's science fiction and will think about it. If you put something like this in a regular novel, people would say, well, that's ridiculous. Why should I read this novel?
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that.
Science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But just because when, in this field, when people are doing their research or speculating, so much of the speculation has been covered in like Star Trek or the X-Files or something like that. So it like you said, it is a vehicle for kind of floating these different scenarios, and then when during research people start to think, well, I have maybe something here that indicates this scenario might be the case, then, and if that scenario has been thought about or represented in a television show, that show then it's kind of like brainstorming different ideas around that scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And some things that we think are so incredible and so fantastic and impossible, a few years later something happens and we realize maybe it's not that impossible.
Mm-hmm. Now, mm-hmm. Now with this scenario, what about this scenario? And I would imagine you've given this thought, because this could be where we're at now, is that, and there are, some people who suggest this as well, that there are things flying around that we seem to be being observed, but we don't know who or what. And so the scenario that the government announces that and says that, okay, finally is forced for some reason, maybe the president has a UFO sighting and he wants to share it, tell everybody about it, and so they have to say, yes, the president did see something unexplainable, and we've been recording these technological devices in our airspace for decades now. We've tried to scramble jets. We can't catch them. We do not know who they are, but we have determined they are not a threat. How impactful do you think that announcement would be?
Well, we came close to something like that in the sense that I don't know if you're aware that John Podesta, who used to be part of the Obama administration,
oh yeah, mm-hmm.
He stepped down. But after he stepped down, he was quoted as saying that he was sorry he didn't press the government more closely to reveal what it had on UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody asked him to clarify that, he made kind of a reference to X-Files. The truth is out there, and left it at that. But, the implication was that he knew more than he was allowed to say.
Mm-hmm.
And several presidents, Bill Clinton, for example, was very interested and wanted to find out what was hidden away. And never said anything about it publicly, but before he was elected, he said that's one of the things he wanted to check on.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be plausible deniability, too. It may well be that there are groups within our government who know something, and then some of our leaders may not know anything, because the money for these projects may come from some of the dark money that is buried inside the Defense Department.
Mm-hmm. But I guess an announcement like that might be a sort of precursor of sorts to First Contact, but one that perhaps might not have the religious or economic impact that, of course, and it kind of relates to, and other researchers have said this, is that how impactful First Contact would be depends on how it takes place, in what manner. A simple message might not be too big of a deal if it's not challenging our economic structure or our religious structure or government or anything like that.
Well, that would be hard to do, though. If the president said something as simple as there are UFOs that we can't, we know they're there, but we just can't, they don't seem to be hostile. We can't really explain them. That wouldn't stop the mass media from speculating about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't stop religious leaders from, in some cases, maybe taking advantage of it. In my book, for example, my novel, I have a fundamentalist Christian who believes the aliens really are simply Lucifer in another guise, that fallen angels are essentially can take any form, and they've just taken the form of the aliens in order to cause humanity to do things it shouldn't really do.
Mm-hmm. And Pat Robertson, for instance, has made statements along those lines as well, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, it may sound crass, but there are religious leaders who would take advantage of. They certainly would fundraise based on an announcement like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it would probably raise more questions than it would answer. In my book, I actually have a press conference that takes place where this guy reveals, aliens, and actually has somebody from Harvard, or from UCSD, stand up and show slides to show that their DNA is fundamentally different and all this kind of stuff, to lend validity. Because obviously, if you had a press conference, people would think it was a fake.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to have some scientists who would provide background information so that people would believe what they were shown, especially nowadays, because we know from movies that you can fake all kinds of things. You can have holographs, you can do all kinds of strange things. So you really would have to bend over backwards to provide scientists at the scene to kind of lend credibility to any kind of statements you made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So do you have a sense, having looked at all of this, that do you believe that we have, in the time that you've been interested in this topic, moved towards more of the public being aware of the possibilities, and perhaps are we moving, do you think we're closer to any sort of first contact?
I have this theory, and I liken it to the public's final acceptance of gay marriage, and that 50, 60 years ago, homosexuality was considered just something so abhorrent that people didn't even talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years, what's happened is the mass media has kind of changed the perception. First of all, we started to see minor characters who were gay, and they were shown to be kind of funny. They were not threatening, whatever. And then over the years, more and more Hollywood and Broadway have had gay characters who were shown sympathetic, to the point that the public gradually has come to accept it as, acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it doesn't seem to be a big deal in, much of the country. Well, what I notice is that there's more and more discussion of the possibility of extraterrestrials in the media, in movies, television. And I think the public is starting to move a little toward at least being agnostic about the possibility. That is, they don't know that it exists, but they don't know that it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of becoming more accepting to the idea. I mean, look what happened back in the 30s when we had this War of the Worlds on radio, and it caused riots, and people, were running for their lives, all this kind of stuff. So we're starting to be sympathetic. It's much easier to write a science fiction movie where you have evil villains like Independence Day than it is to write a sympathetic one like E.T. It's harder. But we're starting to see more and more sympathetically portrayed aliens. Look at Men in Black. There are a lot of sympathetic aliens in Men in Black. Besides the villain, there are all these little creatures that are kind of harmless. So I think the public's perception is kind of changing over time. They're becoming a little more accepting, so that if there was a revelation eventually, it wouldn't cause such dire effects. And whether that is whether there is actually some kind of overall plan to make this happen, some kind of media campaign, or whether it's just the way things are working out, it seems to me that the public is gradually becoming more accepting to the idea.
Well, great. Thank you so much. We're pretty much out of time. It's been really interesting talking to you. And, of course, people can find both of these books, correct, on Amazon?
They're both out there, right.
Right. So you've got many, many books, actually, on Amazon. But we'll provide links in the description. But they can look up Stan Schatt, Schatt.
That's correct.
On Amazon to find you, or the titles, which are Alien Love is the fiction book, that the newest one, and then just a month prior, in February, you released the Extraterrestrial First Contact, Past, Present, and Future, which is your nonfiction book.
Yeah, I should note also that nonfiction book has quite a bibliography in it of other places to find information.
Okay.
For people who are interested in the subject.
Great. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been very interesting.
All right, take care. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much to Stan Schatt for being on the show. Very interesting stuff, and it's always fun to talk to someone new. I mean, until his publicist had gotten a hold of me, I had not heard of him and his work and his book. So be sure to check that out. I know a lot of people are interested in the ideas of what might happen should disclosure happen, or should we, all become aware definitively of the presence of extraterrestrials on our planet. Will people freak out and go nutso, or will they be like, I'm sure a lot of us will be like, told you so. It'll be fun for us because we'll be able to tell people, hey, you made fun of me. Now who looks like a complete fool? You do. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us this week yet again for another Open Minds UFO News. Don't forget openminds.tv. Go there every day. Go there right now because we have lots of really cool UFO news up there that we post every day. We've got UFO sightings. We have headlines from around the world. People are seeing UFOs everywhere. So it's really cool. And the news everywhere is covering this sort of stuff. So be sure to check out the latest on the site. And also, if you are Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Short attention span and you would rather see stuff on video, go to our YouTube site, Open Minds TV YouTube site, and you'll be able to watch the brand new Open Minds UFO report, where we cover a lot of the top news in this video format, and we're keeping it short, so we're keeping it to 10, 15 minutes max because of the short attention span people have on this planet at this time. And but we get a lot of information to you in a quick amount of time. We'll have short interviews there to talk with the news makers out there, but we want to get you the news as soon as possible and as frequent as possible, in as many ways as possible, as cheap as possible. So just like this podcast, that weekly YouTube show is absolutely free. So check that out. The only thing we have that's not free on our site is our video portal, but it's really cool because you can go there and see some lectures for very cheap. I mean, it's very inexpensive. You can become a subscriber, auto renewal. You don't have to worry about it. We're posting stuff there on a monthly basis, including you can go there and see the Bob Lazar video. It's so fun because, as you all know, I was in Contact in the Desert fairly recently, and I was able to run into a lot of UFO Congress attendees, and they just talked about how it was historic and how it just felt magical to be at the UFO Congress to see Bob Lazar talk, because, of course, he's never talked before. But every Congress is like that several times throughout the week, because it's just a lot of fun to have this incredible information shared and discussed. Stan Schatt today was a futurist, and really this is a future. I mean, these are discussions that are about things that, like Stan and I talked about, will be more prominent, I believe, in the future, and we all have this vision of this sort of talk happening in the future, and these sort of things being part of our lives in the future. So do we all have some sort of sixth sense where we know this is going to be how the future will be? Who knows? But it's a lot of fun. So the UFO Congress, you could go to ufocongress.com to register. We'll have speakers posted up soon. We've already started to ask some people. And if you have suggestions, feel free to email us either at contact@ufocongress.com or at contact@openminds.tv. Either way, we'll get the emails and we'll check out your suggestions. We have a huge list of potential speakers that we have to kind of wade through, and so we're going to have some great people. As I mentioned earlier, we're asking Sam Maranto. Maybe he'll know that once he hears this radio show. But anyway, really cool stuff. I hope you can make it. ufocongress.com. And you can find all of this at openminds.tv also. I want to thank Caleb Hanks, who makes the open and close music. Thank you so much. I love it. You could go to our radio page and see a link to his Clerk Chronicles, where he posts a lot of his music, all for free as well. And I think it's really great stuff. I also want to thank Dark Matters Radio, who is playing the show. I always forget who else is kind of playing the show, but hopefully if you're listening from somewhere else, remind me, and I'll thank them. I also want to thank Gene Steinberg and Chris O'Brien, who had me on the Paracast recently. We had a lot of fun there. And, of course, Martin Willis of Podcast UFO, who is now joining us at the beginning of the show for the news. A lot of people to thank, but the people I want to thank the most are you all, you wonderful people. Thank you all so much for joining us every week. I hope you enjoy the show, and we'll have someone new and different coming up in just a few days. So join us next week. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week. Adios, muchachos.